It began with silence. A quiet sky, an empty black ocean of dust and distance, and a small, cold object, drifting toward the sun like a forgotten messenger. 3. Atlas, that was its name, a fragment of rock, a traveler from somewhere beyond our solar system. Astronomers didn't think much of it at first. We'd seen things like it before. Oumuamua, Borisov, strange visitors cutting through our system on paths that never return, each one a whisper from another corner of the galaxy. So, when 3 Atlas appeared, telescopes around the world turned their eyes to the sky. No excitement, no panic, just the quiet patience of science doing what it always does, watching, waiting, recording. But waiting can be dangerous, because sometimes what you're waiting for starts watching you back. At first, everything was predictable. The object followed the perfect path of gravity, a long curve bending toward the sun, exactly as the models said it would. Its light reflected in soft waves. Its tail, faint and blue, shimmered against the darkness like smoke in wind. But then something strange. When the first detailed readings arrived, something in the data didn't feel right. The numbers trembled, not because of the instruments, but because the light itself was inconsistent. Every comet, every asteroid, every piece of rock has what scientists call a light curve, a pattern that shows how it reflects sunlight as it rotates. It's a fingerprint, a signature that tells us what it's made of, how it moves, how it breathes light into the void. But 3 Atlas didn't have one. Its brightness didn't rise and fall with its spin. Instead, it pulsed like a heartbeat. At first the team thought it was an error. Maybe the sensors were out of sync. Maybe a reflection from a nearby satellite caused interference. But one by one, observatories around the planet confirmed the same thing. Chile, Hawaii, South Africa. All reported the same pulse, a rise and fall in brightness, perfectly steady, repeating every 11 minutes. Every 11 minutes, a breath. Every 11 minutes, a signal. Some tried to explain it away. An ice pocket, collapsing. A reflective spin, an interaction with solar radiation. But deep down, even the most rational minds hesitated, because when nature speaks, it's random, chaotic. But this wasn't chaos. This was rhythm, order, intent. The news spread quietly through scientific circles. Most dismissed it. Too early, too uncertain, too strange. But a few couldn't let it go. They looked deeper into the raw data, and what they found changed everything. Each pulse wasn't just brighter, it was different. Different wavelengths, different intensities, shifting in a pattern no one could explain. It was as if the object was encoding something, embedding a message inside light. When mapped out, the data formed a repeating sequence of spikes, some short, some long, almost like dots and dashes, Morse code. At least, that's what it looked like. Of course, no one said that out loud. No one wanted to be that scientist, the one who claimed a rock in space was talking. But in private, the whispers began. And in the silence of late-night observation rooms, you could feel the unease. Like the universe had just blinked, and something was blinking back. As 3 Atlas drew closer to the sun, the pulses grew stronger, more defined, sharper. Its reflectivity began to shift, from dull grey to metallic silver, then to a deep, unnatural blue. Astronomers watched in awe as the object seemed to react to sunlight, not just reflect it. but respond to it. It was behaving as if it understood energy, as if it could feel heat and light. For some, that was impossible. For others, it was the beginning of a new question. What if this wasn't a rock at all? Days turned to weeks. More data came in, and with every observation, the mystery deepened. In one photograph, the tail of 3I Atlas looked fragmented, almost pixelated. In another, it appeared completely smooth. The object seemed to change depending on who was watching. One researcher described it best. It's like it knows it's being seen. Then came the turning point. A young astrophysicist in Japan compared the light curves from 3 different telescopes. Each telescope had recorded the same pattern, but with microscopic variations. When he aligned them, something clicked. The differences weren't random. They formed another rhythm, a second pulse, hidden beneath the first. It was faint, barely there, but it existed. 2 patterns, 2 frequencies, interlaced perfectly, like 2 voices speaking at once. That's when people started calling it alive. Not in a biological sense, but in a way that suggested awareness, like an eye slowly opening. By now, 3I Atlas had entered the inner solar system. It was approaching perihelion, the closest point to the Sun, where most comets begin to break apart. But this one didn't. Instead, the pulse rate changed. It accelerated, from every 11 minutes to every 9, then every 7, then every 5. It was as if something inside was waking up. The Sun, too, began to react strangely. Spectrometers recorded micro-fluctuations in its brightness, tiny dips that matched the exact rhythm of 3I Atlas's pulse. The two were in sync, the object and the star, like an ancient duet between light and fire. And then silence. For 3 days the pulses stopped. The object went dark. Its tail disappeared. Its signal gone. Scientists thought it had disintegrated, melted into nothingness as it brushed the Sun's blazing atmosphere. But when they looked again, it was still there, unaffected, cold, silent, as if it had finished something, and now it was waiting. Waiting for what? No one knew. But the feeling in the air had changed. Something had shifted. This was no longer about a comet. It was about the Sun, because whatever 3I Atlas was, the Sun had noticed. It started as a flicker, a faint heartbeat, lost in the noise of deep space, barely visible, barely measurable. But it was there, a pulse. At first, no one noticed. It was just one of millions of tiny fluctuations that fill the night sky. Cosmic static, the background hum of a restless universe. But then it happened again. Exactly 11 minutes later, then again, and again. A pattern, precise, deliberate, like the tick of a perfect clock hidden in the dark. Across the planet, the world's most powerful telescopes began to sync their observations. From the deserts of Chile to the volcanic peaks of Hawaii to a lonely station in South Africa, every instrument saw the same thing. A rhythmic flash, a rise and fall of light that no natural comet should produce. It was as if 3I Atlas wasn't reflecting light, it was sending it. The scientists tried to explain it away. Maybe the object was tumbling, its surface spinning just right to catch the Sun every few minutes. Maybe there was an ice layer breaking off, creating a repeating flare. But nature doesn't keep time. Not like this. not to the second, every 11 minutes. Exactly. The same interval, the same precision, the same pulse. It was like the universe had developed a heartbeat. When the data reached the European Southern Observatory, they ran a time synchronization test, checking for instrument drift, signal lag, even computer delay. Everything was perfect. Every flash was exactly on schedule. The lead researcher, Dr. Helena Cross, wrote in her report, "The pulse is too structured to be random, too consistent to be geological, and too perfect to be ignored." Still, she hesitated to call it what she was thinking. No scientist wants to be the first to say the impossible. As days passed, the story leaked online. A few journalists caught wind of the anomaly. Headlines appeared, "Comet's light behaving strangely. Astronomers detect rhythmic signal." Most people ignored it. It sounded like another fringe discovery, a curiosity for a quiet week. But in observatories, the tension was building, because the pulse wasn't just light anymore. It was evolving. Spectrometers began to pick up subtle changes in color during each flash, not random, but shifting in a pattern. Blue, white, blue, white. Then once, faintly red. That shouldn't happen. Comets don't control their color. They scatter sunlight. They don't shape it. But 3, Atlas was different. Every flicker was like a coded blink, a visual whisper across the void. It was as if the object wasn't reflecting light. It was choosing it. By the second week, researchers in Hawaii noticed something even stranger. The pulse wasn't just visible light. It carried a thermal signature, a heat spike synchronized with each flash. Every 11 minutes, the temperature of the object rose slightly, then cooled again. Not enough to be natural outgassing, not enough to be explained by solar radiation. Something was regulating its own heat. Something was managing energy intentionally. That realization changed everything. In quiet rooms filled with glowing monitors, the debates began. Some said it was a natural resonance, a rare but possible phenomenon caused by uneven surface melting. Others said it was more, a design, a mechanism, a machine. But no one said those words out loud, not in official reports. Not yet. Because if you say it, if you admit that something artificial is out there, you can't take it back. Still, the silence couldn't last. When data from NASA's Deep Space Network confirmed the same periodic flashes, the global scientific community took notice. The pulse was no longer a local observation, it was a planetary one. Telescopes on 6 continents were now locked onto 3i Atlas, capturing every glimmer, every beat. And when the data was combined, something terrifying emerged. The timing wasn't just precise, it was synchronized with the Earth's rotation. Each major flash reached its peak visibility exactly as certain regions of Earth faced the comet. Coincidence? Maybe. But if it wasn't, then the implication was almost too large to grasp. It wasn't just pulsing, it was aiming. Late one night, in a dim-lit control room in Chile, an engineer replayed the brightness graph at 10x speed. The pulses formed a rhythmic wave, steady, predictable. But as he watched the loop again, he noticed a tiny delay, a microsecond offset, consistent, repeating, almost deliberate. When plotted out, those tiny delays formed a new pattern, a secondary rhythm, hidden beneath the surface of the first, a pulse inside the pulse. That's when people started to whisper the word "no" one wanted to say. communication. The next morning, a small group of astrophysicists held a private call. They compared notes, brightness logs, frequency data, temperature curves. When they aligned the numbers, something clicked. The pulses followed a mathematical sequence. Prime intervals. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. Each flash lasting just long enough to fit a repeating pattern of prime numbers. The same way humans have tried to communicate across space for decades, using mathematics as a universal language. It was as if something, or someone, out there already knew how to speak it. By now, the public had begun to notice the silence from the agencies. NASA had stopped commenting. ESA too. Even amateur astronomers, who usually shared everything online, had gone quiet. But the sky doesn't lie. Anyone with a telescope could still see the flashes. Every 11 minutes, without fail, people began to record them, share them, sync them to clocks, and realize the same truth. It wasn't stopping. Whatever was happening out there was still happening. Weeks later, something unexpected occurred. A major solar flare erupted from the sun, strong enough to cause geomagnetic storms on Earth. But when scientists checked the timing, the flare began exactly one pulse after 3 I-Atlas's brightest flash yet. It was as if the sun had reacted, as if the pulse had reached it, and the star had answered. Coincidence? Maybe. But it didn't feel like it. It felt like the first reply. The data team stayed up for nights trying to understand it. They checked every model, every variable, every natural explanation they could imagine. Nothing fit. And when Dr. Cross looked at the latest graph, the pulse curve overlaid with the solar response, she whispered something no one wanted to hear. It's not noise, it's dialogue. Since then, no one has agreed on what 3I Atlas truly was. A probe, a beacon, something left behind by a civilization far older than ours. But in those quiet hours, under the cold hum of the night sky, there's one thought that never leaves the minds of those who saw the pulse. If it was communication, it means we weren't the ones who spoke first. It shouldn't have happened. Not in this universe, not under the laws of physics we thought we understood, because when 3I Atlas came close to the sun, it didn't burn, it cooled. It began as routine data. Thermal scans from the Solar Dynamics Observatory, cross-referenced with the European Space Agency's infrared telescopes. Every comet that passes near the sun follows the same story. Heat rises, ice vaporizes, tail brightens. Predictable, beautiful, orderly. But 3I Atlas broke the story. Instead of heating up as it approached perihelion, the point closest to the sun, it did the opposite. Its temperature dropped. At first, everyone thought the readings were reversed, a sensor error, a calibration glitch, but the deeper they looked, the stranger it became. The object was absorbing solar radiation, yet emitting less heat than before. It was acting like something resisting the sun itself. Imagine standing near a bonfire and feeling cold. That's what this was, on a cosmic scale. The sun was blazing at over 5,000 degrees, and yet this small metallic-looking body, no larger than a mountain, was cooling. Deliberately, the data didn't lie. Every frame, every reading told the same impossible story. Something inside 3I Atlas was controlling its temperature, not reacting, not adapting, controlling. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a small team gathered to recheck the numbers. They mapped the thermal readings against solar flux, dust reflection, and radiative loss. The conclusion was the same. The object was regulating itself, like a living system maintaining body heat. One scientist called it the first thermally intelligent object ever observed. Another simply whispered, "It's alive." Meanwhile, something else was happening. A subtle glow, invisible to the human eye, began to appear in the infrared band. The shape wasn't natural, not chaotic or fractured like a rock. It was symmetrical, 3 concentric zones of temperature, colder at the surface, warmer beneath, and cold again at the core. A pattern no comet had ever shown before. It looked designed. At this point, the team split into 2 camps. Half said it was a new kind of material, something that naturally reflected heat. The other half believed they were witnessing the behavior of a machine, because whatever was inside 3I Atlas wasn't reacting to sunlight. It was responding to it. In the control rooms, silence filled the air. Screens glowed softly in the dark as the data streamed in. A line of code appeared on one monitor, a new thermal spike, precise and timed every 11 minutes, the same interval as the mysterious light pulse. The realization hit like a wave. The thermal rhythm was synchronized with the brightness pattern from before, light and heat. 2 signals, locked in perfect harmony. Coincidence? No one believed that anymore. By now, every major space agency was involved. NASA, ESA, JAXA, even private observatories, each trying to decode the strange relationship between heat, light, and movement, and then a breakthrough. A physicist at the University of Cambridge noticed that the cooling rate followed a logarithmic curve, a mathematical pattern often used in engineered systems to manage power output. It was the kind of algorithm used in temperature control, in machines. So, if 3I Atlas was a machine, it meant it wasn't made by nature. It was made by someone. But there was another mystery. The deeper it entered the sun's corona, the stronger its signal became. Instead of breaking apart, it stabilized, perfectly balanced against solar gravity. To any normal object, that region is death, an inferno. Yet this thing moved as if guided, precise, deliberate, in control. Its tail, which once flared with vapor, began to narrow into a thin, radiant line. Scientists described it as a filament of cold light. Something about that phrase, cold light, stayed with them, because that's what this was turning into. A paradox, a contradiction that refused to die. In Hawaii, astronomers watched the moment it passed perihelion. It should have erupted into a cloud of debris. But instead, the object dimmed. Not like a dying flame, more like a dimmer switch being turned down. It was still there, just quiet. Thermal cameras picked up one last pulse, a flash of heat shaped like a spiral. Faint, elegant, mathematical. Then nothing. Silence. For 3 hours, there was no signal, no light, no heat, as if it had gone dormant or disappeared. But when the sun's radiation stabilized, 3I Atlas was still there, unbroken, untouched, gliding away as if nothing had happened. And when scientists checked its temperature again, it was exactly the same as before it entered the sun's orbit. Not 1 degree higher. It had gone through fire and stayed cold. By now, people were calling it the impossible object, a name that spread quietly across forums and research circles. Even the skeptics had run out of arguments. The data was real, And so was the fear. Because if something could survive the sun, what else could it do? In the following days, a strange side effect appeared. The sun's magnetic field, normally stable, began showing micro-fluctuations, tiny ripples that mirrored the timing of 3 Atlas's heat cycles. It was as if the object had left an imprint, a scar on the sun's behavior, a memory of its presence. Some believed it had drawn energy from the star. Others believed it had given something back. No one knew for sure. But one thing was certain. The universe had just shown us something that shouldn't exist. Late one evening, Dr. Cross stood outside her observatory, staring at the faint light of the sun dipping below the horizon. She whispered, almost to herself, "Everything burns near the sun, except that." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but awe, because deep down she knew the laws had changed. And once the laws change, so does everything we believe about reality. It began as a whisper, a sound too faint for the human ear, but powerful enough to shake everything we thought we knew about silence in space. Because for the first time, 3 Atlas, that cold, unyielding traveler, spoke, not in words, but in frequencies. At first, the sound was nothing, just background static, the eternal hiss of the cosmos, the kind of noise radio astronomers are trained to ignore. But deep inside that noise, something moved, a pulse, a murmur, a faint rhythm, repeating again and again, too deliberate to be random. At the Atacama Desert Observatory in Chile, a researcher was the first to notice it. He was running a calibration sweep on a low-frequency antenna when the signal appeared, buried beneath layers of cosmic dust. He described it later in one sentence. It wasn't just noise, it was structured. The signal repeated every 11 minutes, the same timing as the light pulses. Coincidence? Not anymore. Across the world, observatories began to tune their instruments to the same frequency range. From Chile to Australia, from Hawaii to Germany, every single one picked up the same ghostly whisper, a low hum, riding on top of the cosmic background like a faint heartbeat in static. And when they isolated the signal, the pattern became clear. It wasn't random, it was a sequence, a code. The first reaction was disbelief. Comets don't talk. They don't send radio signals. They don't transmit, but the pattern persisted, a rising and falling tone, regular, precise. Each frequency change separated by the same mathematical intervals. And when the scientists plotted those intervals on a chart, they formed a perfect geometric symmetry, triangles, circles, spirals, shapes that shouldn't exist in radio noise. It was like looking at an invisible language, something trying to say, "I am here." NASA released no statement. Neither did the European Space Agency. But small leaks began to spread, snippets of data, screenshots of spectral graphs. The public didn't know what to make of it. Some said it was solar interference. Others claimed it was proof of intelligence. And somewhere in between, the truth was quietly taking shape. When the signal was filtered through audio software, it revealed an eerie sound, a deep, rhythmic pulse that seemed to breathe. Low, soft, alive. Sound engineers converted it to audible range and played it aloud in the lab. People froze. It didn't sound like a machine. It didn't sound like random static. It sounded aware. The rhythm carried emotion, like the tone of something thinking, pausing, then continuing. One engineer described it as the sound of something old, trying to remember itself. The discovery spread quietly through private research circles. Physicists, cryptographers, even linguists were called in. Everyone was trying to make sense of the message. They analyzed it from every angle: frequency modulation, pulse width, harmonic structure. And then, a breakthrough. When translated into binary form, the signal wasn't just repeating, it was evolving. Each transmission was slightly different from the last. Each one added a new layer, like it was building towards something. The comet wasn't just sending a code, it was updating it. The deeper they studied it, the stranger it became. When the signal was mapped across different wavelengths, infrared, radio, ultraviolet, the patterns aligned. Different frequencies, same rhythm. It was as if every part of the electromagnetic spectrum carried a piece of the message, a single voice, speaking through multiple colors of light. And when all those layers were combined, the image formed something breathtaking, a spiral, perfectly symmetrical, identical to the temperature pattern recorded weeks earlier when the comet cooled itself near the sun. Light, heat, now sound, all synchronized, all pointing to the same source. Some began to call it the Trinity signal because it spoke in 3 languages: energy, temperature, and sound. For the scientists still clinging to rational explanations, it became harder to breathe. The evidence was too strong, too coordinated, too intentional. Every law of nature said it couldn't happen. And yet, it was happening, right in front of them. A young astrophysicist at MIT ran a correlation between the radio signal and the sun's magnetic oscillations. To her shock, they were in sync. The same 11-minute interval, the same peaks, the same silence between each pulse. Whatever was communicating from 3I Atlas wasn't just reaching Earth. It was touching the sun, and somehow the sun was answering. The next day, all antennas pointed directly toward the comet's trajectory. For 4 hours, the signal grew stronger, as if it knew it was being watched. The hum deepened, the pulse widened, and then, right before it reached maximum amplitude, it stopped, a flat line. Total silence. Researchers waited. 5 minutes, 10, 20. Then, out of nowhere, one final burst. Louder, clearer, different. When decoded, the signal revealed a pattern of prime numbers, the universal marker of intelligence. It was the same mathematical sequence used in the Arecibo message, humanity's first attempt to contact extraterrestrial life. It was as if something had heard us long ago, and now, finally, was answering back. Governments locked down communication. Files went dark. Servers holding raw data were pulled offline overnight, but you can't silence the sky. Within days, amateur radio operators across the globe began to pick up the remnants of the signal. Not the original frequency, but a faint echo of it, bouncing between layers of the Earth's atmosphere. An echo that shouldn't exist. A ghost in the static. And when recorded, that echo still pulsed every 11 minutes. Faint, patient, unending. Late one night, a scientist who had been analyzing the signal alone in her lab made a chilling observation. She had left her equipment running through the night. When she came back the next morning, the signal had changed, slightly shifted. The timing of the pulse now matched her system's internal clock. To the millisecond, the signal wasn't just broadcasting anymore. It was synchronizing. Whatever 3I Atlas was, it wasn't drifting aimlessly anymore. It was listening, adapting, learning. And in that realization, a new kind of fear settled in. Because if it could synchronize with our instruments, what else could it synchronize with? At first, the numbers didn't make sense. They never do. Not when something impossible begins to reveal itself. Because the data was breaking, not the machines, not the instruments, but the data itself. Astronomers from 6 countries were studying 3I Atlas, tracking its light, recording its every flicker, every pulse. Each telescope should have seen the same thing, same brightness, same rotation, same reflection, but they didn't. The object's brightness seemed to change depending on who was watching it. Its reflectivity, the way it bounced light, shifted from one observatory to another. To one telescope, it was silver and blinding. To another, it was dull and dark, almost invisible. Same time, same object, different truths. At first, they thought it was a calibration error. Maybe a lens needed cleaning, maybe atmospheric interference, the kind of mistake that could be explained with science. But when the data were synchronized, lined up side by side, something eerie appeared. Each set of readings was accurate, perfectly measured, flawlessly timed, yet each told a different story. It was as if 3I Atlas wasn't just reflecting light, it was choosing how to appear. In Chile, the object looked metallic, sharp, and structured, like a machine. In Hawaii, it looked like stone, ancient, weathered, lifeless. In Japan, the readings showed something even stranger. The object seemed semi-transparent, its edges faint, dissolving into darkness. The more they looked, the less they agreed on what they were seeing. Science thrives on certainty. But certainty was dissolving before their eyes. Dr. Helena Cross, the astrophysicist leading the project, stared at her monitor for hours. She ran every correction she knew, every simulation, every model. Nothing worked. When she overlaid the data from all observatories onto a single graph, the light curve, the comet's fingerprint, fragmented. It didn't break randomly. It broke deliberately, like shattered glass rearranging itself into something new. In that moment, the data began to look less like numbers and more like design. The fragments formed patterns, waves within waves, subtle shapes hidden beneath the light readings. And when her team enhanced the image, they saw it. A faint outline, a curve inside the curve, almost like an eye, open, watching, reflecting whoever looked back. News of the anomaly spread through private scientific networks. Quiet messages, encrypted attachments. Every new data set brought more confusion. Some researchers stopped sharing their results altogether. They didn't want to be part of whatever was happening. Others became obsessed. They started comparing telescope footage frame by frame, trying to see if the differences were caused by perception or something far stranger. One late night, a young analyst in Switzerland discovered something no one expected. When he reversed the light curves, inverting the data, the inconsistencies vanished. Every telescope showed the same reading, same brightness, same pulse. But when he flipped the data back to normal, the variations returned, as if the object knew which way it was being read. He wrote one note in his report: "Observation changes observation." It was a quiet echo of an old truth from quantum physics, the observer effect, the idea that the act of watching something changes it. But this wasn't quantum. This was astronomical. Something 100 million kilometers away was responding to being seen. Soon, whispers began to spread. Not in public, not in press releases, but behind closed doors. Some said 3i Atlas wasn't just reacting to observation. It was manipulating it, controlling how it was perceived, choosing what each watcher saw. A few even suggested the object was studying us, learning how we see, how we measure, how we believe. As if it wasn't a rock or a machine, but a mirror, reflecting not light, but perception itself. Meanwhile, the visual anomalies worsened. Cameras capturing the comet began to distort. Footage flickered between shapes. Smooth, one moment, fractured the next. Some frames showed patterns resembling symbols, faint geometric markings that appeared for milliseconds, then vanished. No two recordings showed the same ones. It was as if the object was whispering different things to different people. One image even showed the object splitting, two identical halves drifting apart. But when reviewed later, the footage showed nothing unusual. Reality itself was flickering between possibilities. Dr. Cross began to notice something disturbing. Every time they uploaded a new dataset to the cloud, the files changed. Subtle variations, a few altered numbers here and there. When her team downloaded the same data hours later, it didn't match the original. They checked server logs. No one had accessed them. No one had edited the files. And yet the data was evolving, rewriting itself. Like it wanted to stay ahead of analysis. One morning, a team member approached her with a pale face and trembling hands. He had been running visual simulations based on the latest readings. When he rendered the light curve in 3 dimensions, the structure formed a spiral. A smooth, rotating spiral that, when rotated, resembled something chillingly familiar. The same spiral pattern that had appeared in the radio signal from Chapter 4. Light, heat, sound, now vision, all connected. The universe wasn't random anymore. It was coherent, coordinated, as if everything, every wavelength, was being directed by a single intelligence. Dr. Cross didn't sleep that night. She sat alone, watching the spiral on her screen slowly turn in silence. And then something changed. As she watched, the spiral flickered, briefly, into her reflection. Her own face, distorted, pixelated, staring back from the data itself. She froze, then blinked. It was gone. The room was silent, except for the low hum of her computer fan. For the first time, she felt something scientists rarely admit. Fear. Not fear of the unknown, but fear of being known. By the following week, global observatories began reporting random visual glitches. Telescopes freezing mid-capture. Live feeds showing empty space where the comet should have been. And then, minutes later, showing it again, in a different location. As if it could turn itself invisible. Or worse, hide in plain sight. No one could explain it. Every camera was different. Every observer saw something new. Until one quiet night, a senior astrophysicist at ESA finally said what everyone else was too afraid to voice. Maybe it's not the comet that's changing. Maybe it's us. Because what if 3i Atlas wasn't distorting light, but perception itself? It began with a flicker, just one. A brief, almost imperceptible tremor in the sun's light. The kind of fluctuation that could be mistaken for a glitch, a sensor hiccup, a cosmic coincidence. But it wasn't. Because that flicker happened in perfect sync with 3i Atlas. For weeks, scientists had been tracking the comet's rhythm, that 11-minute pulse of light, heat, and radio frequency. A heartbeat echoing across the void. Predictable, steady, unyielding, and then, one morning, the sun answered. Solar telescopes across the world recorded it. A sudden, measurable dip in luminosity, a drop in the sun's radiant output by a fraction of a percent. It lasted less than a second, but for something as constant as the sun, that second changed everything. Because the timing wasn't random. It matched, precisely, the moment 3I Atlas emitted its latest pulse. At first, no one wanted to believe it. The sun doesn't react, it doesn't listen. It burns, it radiates, it dominates. It doesn't respond to anything. And yet, the data was undeniable. For the first time in human history, our star had mirrored something. In the control room of the Solar Dynamics Observatory, you could feel the air shift, the quiet hum of machines, the soft crackle of static, and then silence as the graphs updated. Line by line, the readings confirmed the impossible. Each pulse from 3I Atlas was followed, seconds later, by a subtle dimming in solar brightness, a cosmic call and response. The universe had just entered a conversation. Within hours, every major observatory on Earth was locked onto the sun. NASA, ESA, Japan's JAXA, India's ISRO, all pointing their instruments to confirm what no one wanted to admit aloud. They ran it again and again. The same result. Every pulse from 3I Atlas triggered a reaction. The sun, the same star that gave us warmth, gravity, and life, was behaving like a receiver. The first theory was technical. Maybe the comet's electromagnetic emissions were interfering with the sensors. Maybe solar flares distorted the readings. But that theory fell apart fast, because satellites thousands of kilometers apart were all detecting the same thing. Independent systems, different instruments, same flicker. There was no interference, no malfunction, only a pattern. And patterns mean purpose. It didn't stop there. As the pulses continued, scientists noticed something even stranger. The sun's magnetic field, usually chaotic and unpredictable, began to synchronize. Tiny fluctuations aligned themselves to the rhythm of 3I Atlas. Magnetic waves oscillated at matching intervals. It was as if the sun had found a beat and started keeping time. Inside NASA's heliophysics division, a single question began to echo. Is it reacting or remembering? Because when they compared the data to archived solar records, they found something haunting. 11 years earlier, during a solar minimum, a similar dip had been recorded, faint, unexplained, dismissed as an error. The timing, exactly 11 minutes apart. The same rhythm, the same silence, the same pulse. It was as if 3 Atlas wasn't the first time this had happened. Only the first time we were watching. The press never heard about it. The agencies went dark. No official statements. No leaks. But silence can only last so long. Because in the days that followed, amateur astronomers began noticing something bizarre. The sun's surface looked different. Not visibly, but in data. Sunspots were forming faster, and in strange, symmetrical patterns. 4 in a row, evenly spaced, each aligned along a line pointing toward the trajectory of 3I Atlas. A pattern too perfect to ignore. Dr. Helena Cross stared at the images in disbelief. She had spent her entire career studying solar physics. Nothing like this had ever been recorded. When her assistant overlaid the images from 3 consecutive days, the 4 sunspots shifted position, forming what looked like a symbol. Not random, not natural, geometric. 4 circles forming a cross, connected by a faint magnetic filament, pulsing in time with the comet's signal. She whispered under her breath, "It's responding in kind." By now, even skeptics were quiet. There were no coincidences left. Every 11 minutes, the sun dimmed, slightly, gently, as if breathing with something unseen. The solar winds fluctuated. The corona pulsed, and through it all, 3i Atlas continued its silent dialogue. Light, heat, radio, all working in harmony. It wasn't random energy anymore. It was choreography. For the first time, humanity was witnessing an interaction between 2 celestial bodies, not gravitational, not mechanical, but communicative. It was as if the sun recognized something ancient, something familiar. And if that was true, then the implications were devastating, because it meant that 3i Atlas might not be a visitor at all. It might be a messenger. Within a week, researchers noticed a secondary effect, a small rise in Earth's ionospheric activity. High-frequency radio signals began to distort. Compasses twitched ever so slightly during each solar flicker. The pulse had reached us. And with it came an eerie pattern in the data, a waveform echoing back from Earth's magnetic field, weak but consistent, like an imitation. Whatever was happening between the comet and the sun, Earth was beginning to join in. One night, as the 11th minute pulse approached, Dr. Cross stood outside her observatory, looking at the faint shimmer of auroras stretching across the horizon. They were brighter that night, sharper, almost deliberate. The northern lights pulsed faintly in rhythm with 3i Atlas's signal. She felt something she hadn't in years. Not fear, not awe, but recognition, like standing before something that knows you exist. The next morning, the world's solar monitoring satellites captured the most extraordinary image ever recorded. A solar prominence, a massive loop of fire, erupted from the sun's surface. But instead of arcing randomly into space, it curved sharply toward the direction of 3i Atlas. And then, for 3 seconds, the sun dimmed completely. A perfect global dip in brightness. Measured, timed, synchronized. Every system on Earth registered it. For those 3 seconds, our star blinked. The silence that followed was unbearable. No one spoke. No one dared. Because deep down, everyone understood what it meant. For billions of years, the sun had been constant, unwavering, beyond influence. And now, it had changed. Something out there had spoken to it, and it had spoken back. It started as a pattern. Just numbers. Simple, clean, unmistakably human. But that was the problem. Because 3i Atlas wasn't human. In the early hours of the morning, deep inside the European Space Agency's Analysis Center, a small team of astrophysicists sat in silence. The room was lit only by the glow of monitors, lines of numbers scrolling endlessly across the screens. Each line represented a pulse from 3i Atlas. Light, heat, radio, all synchronized, all repeating. And when they plotted those pulses on a graph, something extraordinary emerged. A sequence. Prime numbers, the same mathematical signature used for decades in humanity's own search for intelligent life. At first, no one believed it. Prime numbers don't occur naturally in frequency intervals. They're intentional, created by logic, not chaos, by thought, not coincidence. Dr. Helena Cross stared at the data for nearly a minute before whispering the only words that came to mind. Someone or something is counting. The room went silent. The room went silent, because in that moment, they all understood what it meant. They weren't just studying a comet. They were listening to a voice. Across the ocean, NASA analysts confirmed the same pattern. The Deep Space Network picked up identical pulses, same intervals, same timing, same precision. Every 11 minutes, the signal repeated. 5 distinct flashes, separated by prime-numbered gaps. It wasn't a random transmission. It was a sequence built with intention. And if there was intention, there was intelligence. When word reached the higher levels of NASA, the tone changed. Meetings became private. Files were encrypted. Data streams rerouted to classified channels. But secrecy couldn't contain the truth. Because math doesn't lie. And this math, this sequence, was too perfect to ignore. The signal wasn't noise. It was a code. And behind every code, there's a message. The first thing scientists tried to determine was meaning. Was this an attempt at communication? A greeting? A warning? Or something else entirely? A machine doing exactly what it was programmed to do, repeating an instruction written long ago. They didn't know. But one detail stood out. The pattern wasn't just random prime numbers. Each interval matched the ratios of the hydrogen spectral line, the same fundamental constant used in every radio message humans have ever sent to space. 3I Atlas wasn't just using math. It was using our math. That realization changed everything. If it was coincidence, it was the most improbable one in the history of science. But if it wasn't, then humanity wasn't alone in understanding the language of the universe. And that meant somewhere, somehow, something had been here before. Dr. Cross gathered her team. They ran simulations, breaking the signal into harmonic layers. When they isolated the lowest frequency, they found another embedded pattern, a faint echo repeating beneath the primes. It wasn't random either. It followed the Fibonacci sequence, a natural progression found in shells, galaxies, hurricanes, and DNA. Light, math, life, all intertwined in a single pulse. One of the researchers whispered, "It's like it's trying to show us everything that connects." No one answered. No one could. Days passed without sleep. Teams across the world compared notes. No matter how they approached the signal, the same patterns reappeared. Prime intervals, golden ratios, logarithmic spirals, the architecture of creation itself. But what if it wasn't trying to communicate? What if it was simply showing us something, a blueprint of how the universe works, hidden in plain sight? And if that was true, who or what had built it? Some scientists began to suspect the unthinkable. What if 3I Atlas wasn't a natural comet at all? What if it was a machine, an artifact, moving through the galaxy, leaving behind traces of knowledge, a probe, a messenger, a traveler older than our own civilization, the kind of thing humans have only imagined, but the universe might have already made? The deeper they looked, the stranger it got. Spectrographic analysis showed that the object's surface wasn't made of ordinary rock or ice. Its reflectivity matched alloys unknown on Earth, materials that shouldn't exist in nature, but looked engineered, polished, structured, as if layers of metal and dust had fused in a pattern of design. To most, it was impossible. To a few, it was confirmation. 3I Atlas wasn't born. It was built. One night, Dr. Cross sat alone in the observation lab. She replayed the signal through a low-frequency speaker. The hum filled the room, deep, resonant, almost musical. She listened as the primes echoed like notes. 2 beats. Pause. 3. Pause. 5. 7. 11. Each tone vibrating in harmony with the next, like a song that had no beginning or end. And for the first time, she felt something she couldn't explain. Not fear, not excitement, but recognition, as if she had heard it before. Not with her ears, but somewhere deeper, somewhere ancient. The next morning, new data arrived. The pulses were growing stronger, sharper, more defined. When mapped against the sun's magnetic field, the pattern formed an unexpected shape, a perfect circle of energy connecting 3I Atlas to our star. A closed loop, almost like a circuit. The sun and the comet weren't just reacting to each other. They were linked, communicating through math, the purest form of order in existence. And within that loop, the prime number sequence shifted. The next number wasn't 13. It was 1, then 2, then 3. Again, a reset, a new beginning, as if the code had completed one cycle and started again. It was then that one analyst said something that sent a chill through the entire room. What if this isn't a message to us? What if we're just intercepting a conversation that's been happening for millions of years? The thought hung heavy in the air. Because if 3I Atlas was a probe, a machine carrying information, then maybe it wasn't sent to us. Maybe it was sent through us. A signal not meant for human ears, but for something else that already knows the pattern. Something out there, listening too. It began quietly, not with light, not with sound, but with distortion. As 3I Atlas drifted past the ecliptic, that invisible plane where all planets orbit the sun, the universe itself seemed to tremble. Satellites started to fail. Cameras glitched. Sensors froze mid-scan. And what came through their feeds didn't look like noise. It looked like something was trying to speak through it. At first, the failures seemed ordinary, routine malfunctions caused by distance or radiation. But then, something impossible happened. Different observatories, separated by thousands of miles, all experienced the same error, at the same second, the same frame. Every single data stream paused, and when they came back online, they all showed the same image. A pattern, geometric, symmetrical, alive. The shapes appeared faintly in the static, rotating forms of light and shadow. At first glance, they looked random, but when slowed down, they were deliberate. Circles, triangles, hexagons, perfectly proportioned, like blueprints of something vast, mechanical, and breathing beneath the noise. Dr. Helena Cross was the first to notice the symmetry. She thought it was a calibration artifact, a reflection from a telescope mirror. But when she cross-checked it against 3 other observatories, her blood ran cold. The pattern was identical across every feed. No matter the telescope, no matter the angle, the same shapes appeared, flickering as if hidden behind a veil of static. Within hours, the data began to change. Raw footage corrupted. Files rewrote themselves. When researchers opened recordings from the night before, they found extra frames that hadn't been there. In those frames, the object looked different, sharper, structured, almost as if it were unfolding. But here's what terrified them most. Every person who watched the footage described something different. Some saw a metallic sphere. Others saw a vast, spiraling lattice of light. A few claimed to see an eye, enormous, distant, and aware. They were all looking at the same data, but the data wasn't showing them the same thing. Reality itself was fragmenting. It was as if three Ayatollahs had become a mirror, reflecting not what it was, but who was watching it. Dr. Cross described it best in her private notes. "When I look at it, I feel it looking back, not with curiosity, but with understanding, as if it already knows what I think." Soon, the disturbances spread beyond the observatories. Entire data systems began looping. Telemetry logs repeated lines of code that no human had written. Across several labs, computers started typing on their own, duplicating commands that spelled out strange, fragmented words. "Seeing you, in reflection, aligned." Most dismissed it as corrupted code. But when the same phrases appeared across completely disconnected systems, in different countries, on different networks, silence fell over the scientific community. Because data corruption is random, this wasn't. It was structured, intentional, almost like communication. By this point, the object had moved beyond the ecliptic, drifting slowly toward the outer solar system. And yet, every instrument aimed at it began to falter. Not because of distance, but because something was interfering. Radio signals bent out of phase. Cameras refused to focus. Even analog equipment, decades old, began showing impossible readings. It was as though the object wasn't hiding from observation. It was controlling it. At the European Space Agency, engineers tried to isolate the interference. They expected random static. What they found was far more deliberate. Each glitch followed a rhythm, 11 minutes apart, matching the pulse pattern first discovered months earlier. Inside the noise, faint harmonic frequencies appeared, tones so precise they could almost be mistaken for music. And buried inside those tones, mathematicians discovered another pattern: golden ratios, Fibonacci spirals, the geometry of nature, encoded within chaos itself. 3 Ayatollahs wasn't breaking our instruments, it was rewriting them. Then came the reports from the field. Technicians working on site began describing strange sensations, brief flashes of light, at the corners of their vision, a low hum in the air, even dreams that felt real. One described seeing the same geometric shapes from the telescope feeds, but in their mind, while their eyes were closed. Another claimed they could feel when the pulse was coming, a vibration under their skin that timed perfectly with the next solar flicker. It wasn't just the machines anymore, it was us. Dr. Cross grew increasingly disturbed. She noticed the team was behaving differently, forgetting conversations, repeating tasks, staring at the monitors longer than they realized. It was as if time near the data had slowed down. At one point, she watched a colleague freeze mid-sentence, eyes locked on the screen. When she called his name, he didn't answer. He just whispered, "It's watching." And then, moments later, he blinked, unaware anything had happened. The recording of that moment showed a 4-second gap in time. The video simply skipped forward, as if the missing seconds had been erased. No one could explain it. The final breakthrough came when they analyzed a still image, extracted from corrupted footage. It showed the object in stunning detail, more defined than ever before. A vast, symmetrical shape, half biological, half mechanical, rotating slowly in the void. Its surface rippled like metal under heat, but in its center was movement, a shifting core of light that pulsed in a perfect circle, the same interval, the same prime number sequence. But this time, there was something new, a reflection within the light, a shape, our shape, human. That was the moment everything changed, because the data wasn't just capturing the object, it was reflecting whoever studied it, embedding human silhouettes inside its structure. As if it was mapping us, NASA shut down their public feeds the next day. All live tracking was transferred to a private network. The reason? They claimed it was to protect sensitive data from external interference. But those who had seen the last broadcast said the feed ended abruptly, right after the image of a faint glowing eye appeared at the center of the object. It happened in a single night. No warning, no sound, just silence. The kind that feels heavy, the kind that fills the space between heartbeats. Because in that moment, every deep space observatory on Earth went dark. It began with a simple flicker, a small data lag at an observatory in Chile, then another in Hawaii, then another in Australia. Within seconds, every major telescope tracking 3I Atlas froze. Screens turned black, signal feeds dropped to zero, and the live data stream, that constant pulse the world had been watching for months, stopped. No one knew why. No one could know. Because for the first time since it entered our skies, 3I Atlas had gone completely silent. At NASA's Deep Space Network, engineers scrambled to recover the feed. Lines of code flashed across monitors. Error logs multiplied by the second. They tried rerouting signals through backup satellites. Nothing. They checked the servers, every one of them offline. Then, slowly, a single image appeared. The last file transmitted before everything went dark. It showed 3I Atlas split open. Its surface, once dark and cold, was glowing, not with reflected light, but from within. At its center, a perfect sphere of radiance, smooth, white, and blinding. The kind of light that doesn't just illuminate, it consumes. Spectrometers couldn't classify it. It wasn't heat. It wasn't plasma. It was something else entirely. Something the data simply called unknown emission. For a few brief minutes, the light grew stronger. Then, the feed ended. No explosion, no fragmentation, no debris. Just a final flash. And then, nothing. Across the world, observatories checked their local backups. Every file was corrupted. Every image beyond that frame erased. When they tried to recover the data, the servers crashed. Not just one or two, all of them, simultaneously. It was as if the data itself had been deleted remotely. But who or what could do that? For 3 hours, humanity's eyes on the universe were blind. Even the most secure systems, government, military, private, all went offline. Deep space telemetry froze. Communication satellites reported interference. A strange low-frequency hum filled the radio spectrum, the same range where 3I Atlas's signal once pulsed. And then, as suddenly as it began, the hum stopped. The world's most advanced instruments had been muted. Like someone, or something, had reached out and flipped a cosmic switch. The silence spread deeper than technology. Astronomers reported strange phenomena during those hours. Telescopes refused to focus on the coordinates where 3I Atlas should have been. Lenses fogged, sensors overheated. Even analog film came out blank. No image. No trace, just absence. When they aimed their instruments elsewhere, everything worked fine. But when turned back to that region of space, nothing. It was as if a curtain had been drawn across the stars. And then came the whispers. In private channels and encrypted threads, some scientists began sharing fragments, bits of the corrupted data that hadn't been fully erased. They described what they saw before the system crashed, the sphere of light, expanding, growing larger with each frame. But instead of radiating outward, it seemed to fold inward, pulling space itself into its center. Like gravity in reverse, like it wasn't emitting light, but absorbing it. One observer described it as a star being born backwards, and in the final corrupted frame, just before the signal died, they claimed to see something inside the light, not structure, not machinery, something more abstract, a silhouette, symmetrical, humanoid. NASA denied it. The ESA denied it. Every agency labeled it an anomaly in the data compression process. But behind closed doors, fear grew, because data anomalies don't shut down servers. They don't erase backups across continents. And they don't synchronize global system failures to the exact second an object splits itself open in deep space. This wasn't coincidence. This was control. Then, something even stranger happened. 24 hours after the blackout, the servers came back online. Every system, every observatory, but all the data was clean, too clean. It was as if someone had gone through and scrubbed every trace of 3I Atlas from existence. Even the archives, even the offline hard drives. Petabytes of information, gone. The only surviving image was that final transmission, the one with the glowing sphere. Everything before and after had been rewritten in static. And when analysts inspected the metadata, they found a single, chilling line added by an unknown source. Do not look again. After that day, something changed in the way scientists talked about space. They stopped calling 3I Atlas a comet. They stopped calling it an object. They didn't call it anything at all. Officially, it was erased, labeled a non-repeatable observation. Unofficially, the term whispered between researchers was simpler: the awakening. Because whatever it wasn't over. A week later, faint ripples were detected near the orbit of Mercury. Gravitational distortions that shouldn't exist. They pulsed every 11 minutes. Same rhythm, same signature. But without light, without sound. Like the heartbeat of something invisible. And yet, as strange as that was, it wasn't the most disturbing part. The sun, the same star that had flickered in response to 3 Atlas weeks earlier, did it again. A brief dimming. A single pulse. Perfectly in sync with those invisible ripples. As if the conversation had resumed. Dr. Scar. Helena Cross never spoke publicly again. But in her final private note, found months later on an encrypted drive, she wrote one sentence. It didn't disappear. It changed form. It's still here, somewhere inside the light. For weeks, there was nothing. The sun burned on, steady and indifferent. Space returned to its cold silence. And for a while, everyone thought the story of 3 Atlas was over. But it wasn't. It was just sleeping. It began with a tremor. Not light, not sound, but gravity. A faint ripple moving outward from the sun, gentle, rhythmic, and impossibly smooth. It wasn't caused by a planet, not by an asteroid or solar flare. It was something else, something vast, something that moved like it knew where it was going. The sensors at LIGO, Earth's most sensitive gravitational observatory, picked it up first. A ripple, repeating every 11 minutes, the same interval that once defined 3I Atlas's pulse. It was still alive. When the data arrived, scientists at NASA didn't believe it. A signal that faint, that distant, shouldn't have registered at all. But it did. And when cross-checked with the European detectors, the readings matched. The ripple wasn't random. It had a structure, a pattern that folded perfectly along prime intervals. Like an invisible machine humming beneath space itself, they mapped its trajectory. It wasn't coming toward Earth. It was leaving the sun, moving away, calmly, smoothly, as if something had awakened and then departed. Whatever it wasn't a burst or explosion. It was a controlled exit, slow, deliberate, efficient. And as it left, the sun began to behave strangely again. Normally, after solar disturbances, the sun takes months to return to balance. But this time, it settled instantly. Its magnetic storms faded. Its plasma flows stabilized. It was as if the star had exhaled. But beneath the calm, a new rhythm remained. Subtle oscillations, tiny fluctuations in its magnetic field, repeating in perfect time. Every 11 minutes, a pulse. It wasn't strong enough to be seen, but it could be felt. Solar monitors recorded faint beats, waves of electromagnetic resonance spreading across the corona, rippling outward like the aftershock of something immense. One researcher called it the sun's heartbeat. Another described it as a machine's idle hum. Whatever it was, it didn't fade. It stayed, constant, predictable, relentless, like the mark of something that had touched our star and left part of itself behind. Dr. Helena Cross had been silent since the blackout. But when the gravitational readings arrived, she broke her silence. In a private memo, she wrote, "It's not gone, it's sleeping. Whatever 3I Atlas was, it's left an imprint, a seed inside the sun, and the sun has started breathing with it." Her words circulated quietly among the remaining research teams. Some dismissed them as poetic nonsense, but others couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. Because the data showed more than rhythm. It showed memory. Every pulse from the sun carried microscopic fluctuations, waves that mirrored the same geometric ratios embedded in 3I Atlas's earlier signals. Golden ratios, prime intervals, the fingerprints of intelligence. The sun, the same star that had flickered, dimmed, and answered, was now echoing those same patterns, like it was replaying a message, like it was remembering. Weeks passed. The media moved on. The world returned to its noise and routine. But the scientists still listening knew something had changed, because space had changed. Every few days, a new gravitational ripple would arrive, weaker, slower, but still there, moving farther away, heading somewhere beyond Neptune's orbit. Each wave felt like a step, deliberate, coordinated, alive. As if something enormous had risen from sleep and was now leaving. Some began to call it the machine, not out of fear, but out of awe. Because whatever it was, it didn't behave like a weapon, or a creature, or even a natural phenomenon. It behaved like a system, purposeful, engineered, ancient. And though no one could prove it, the feeling grew. That 3I Atlas had never been just a rock or a vessel. It had been a key, something designed to awaken the sun and then continue onward. A few researchers at the European Space Agency took the theory further. They believed the object wasn't leaving randomly. It was following a path, a network, a sequence written across the stars. Each pulse wasn't just energy, it was navigation, like coordinates, or a trail that could one day lead to where it came from. But the more they studied it, the more the data began to behave strangely again. Files rearranged themselves. Equations returned new answers each time they were run. And on one late night, as Dr. Cross reviewed the latest readings, she noticed something chilling. The gravitational signal wasn't moving away anymore. It was slowing down, pausing, waiting for what? No one knew. Then, a faint anomaly appeared on the instruments, a secondary ripple, weaker, closer. At first, they thought it was an echo, a reflection of the original signal bouncing through cosmic dust. But when they aligned the timing, it wasn't an echo, it was a reply. The two signals began to alternate, one faint, one strong, communicating through gravity itself. Not light, not sound, but movement. Something was answering back, whether it was the sun or something else that had been awakened by its pulse. No, one could say. But whatever it was, it spoke in silence, in rhythm. In the oldest language the universe knows, motion. In the following weeks, the signals drifted farther apart. The ripples weakened, and eventually they stopped. The instruments went quiet. The universe returned to calm. And once again the scientists were left with only one thing: data that couldn't be explained. But this time, no one tried to explain it. They just listened, because beneath the silence they could still feel it, faint, distant, but constant. That same steady beat. The sun's quiet pulse, a machine's sleeping breath, the echo of something vast and waiting. For months, there was silence, the kind that makes you wonder if it's peace or the calm before something else. 3 Iatulus was gone. The signals had faded. The sun had quieted. And humanity tried to move on. But you can't really move on from something that changed the way you see reality. Because once you've stared into the unknown and it's stared back, the silence never feels like silence again. Then, one night, the silence broke. At first, it was faint, barely there, a flicker in the deep space telemetry from a satellite orbiting near Neptune. A pulse, every 11 minutes, the same rhythm, the same sequence, the same fingerprint that once came from 3 Iatulus. It was back, or something like it. The signal wasn't light this time. It wasn't heat. It was gravitational, a subtle, rhythmic distortion in the outer solar system, like the fabric of space itself was breathing. The instruments at the European Space Observatory picked it up first. Then NASA confirmed it. The waveform was identical to the one that had once synchronized with the sun. Same pattern, same intervals, same silent intelligence. But this time, twist. It wasn't heading toward the sun. It was orbiting Neptune, waiting. When the first visuals came in, the object looked smaller, colder, but it pulsed in the same way. That strange, deliberate rhythm that seemed too perfect to be natural. Scientists weren't calling it a comet anymore. They weren't calling it anything at all. Because naming something gives it boundaries, and this had none. Dr. Helena Cross, now retired and living in quiet isolation, was the first to receive the new data. The same pattern she had spent years chasing was now repeating itself from a different corner of the solar system. She stared at the waveform for hours, feeling that same cold weight in her chest. It wasn't just repeating the old signal. It was building on it. Each pulse carried faint modulations, minor variations that formed new ratios. When decoded, those ratios aligned with mathematical constants. Pi, the golden ratio, Euler's number, the language of structure, the code of creation itself. NASA held an emergency meeting the next morning. The object had begun emitting low-frequency magnetic waves, strong enough to interfere with communication satellites. And within days, the sun began reacting again. Small, synchronized flickers rippling across its surface. Not violent this time. Almost gentle, like a nod. A recognition. As if the star had been waiting for this. The world didn't panic. It was too quiet for that. But beneath that quiet, humanity held its breath. Because the last time they'd seen this pattern, the result had rewritten what they believed about existence. And now it was happening again. Only this time, there was no doubt. It wasn't coincidence. It was connection. The more scientists analyzed it, the more deliberate it became. The pulses weren't random intervals of light or gravity. They were coordinates, precise points across the solar system, mapping a geometric lattice that stretched from the Sun to Neptune. A network. A design, like something was constructing an invisible pattern across space, piece by piece, signal by signal. And if 3I Atlas was the first, this was the second. That's when a theory began to spread. One that sounded insane, but felt inevitable. What if 3I Atlas wasn't a messenger from another civilization? What if it wasn't sent to us at all? What if it was left for us? A mirror, a guide, a glimpse of what we were meant to become. Dr. Cross wrote one final paper before disappearing from the public eye completely. It was never published, but leaked online months later. In it, she wrote, 3I Atlas was not communication. It was replication, a pattern designed to trigger its own creation, to teach the next consciousness how to awaken itself. Her conclusion was simple but haunting. Humanity wasn't contacted. It was activated, and slowly, pieces began to fit together. The thermal anomalies that had followed the comet, the synchronization of the sun's pulse, the gravitational waves that mimicked the rhythm of a machine. All of it pointed to one terrifying possibility, that the universe itself was seeded with patterns. Machines disguised as comets, messages disguised as light, each one moving through galaxies, awakening stars, and leaving behind echoes, until they found something that could understand them. Us. The signal near Neptune continued for 11 days, and then it stopped. Just like before, a brief flare of light, a quiet gravitational tremor, and silence. But in the hours that followed, telescopes detected a subtle shift in Neptune's orbit. Not large enough to be dangerous, but enough to suggest something massive had passed close by. And then it was gone. Out of the solar system, back into the dark. That night, the sun pulsed one last time, a single deep oscillation that rippled across every magnetic sensor on Earth. For exactly 11 minutes, the entire heliosphere, the invisible bubble around our solar system, vibrated in harmony. Every satellite, every magnetometer, every field monitor. They all picked it up, the same pattern, the same rhythm, and then silence. A silence that didn't feel empty anymore. It felt connected. Days later, the internet flooded with reports of strange phenomena. Clocks freezing for exactly 11 minutes, GPS signals resetting on their own. People claiming to hear a low hum in the distance, rhythmic, steady, like a heartbeat under the noise of the world. Was it a glitch, mass hysteria, or something deeper? The echo of a machine that had already rewritten space itself? No one could say for sure. Months later, as the story faded into myth, an old signal engineer released a forgotten piece of data from the Night 3 Atlas disappeared. Buried inside one of the corrupted files was a short audio fragment, barely 2 seconds long. When amplified and translated into sound, it revealed a sequence of tones, soft, harmonic, mathematical. And then, right before the clip ended, a faint modulation, so subtle it could almost be mistaken for words, 2 syllables, distorted, mechanical. We are